Hey, welcome to the Science of Parenting podcast, where we connect you with research-based information that fits your family. We'll talk about the realities of being a parent and how research can help guide our parenting decisions. I'm Mackenzie Johnson, parent of two littles with their own quirks, and I'm a parenting educator.
And I'm Lori Hanks, parent of three, one launched, one in college, and one in high school. And I am a parenting educator as well. I always feel so funny as we repeat. Anyway, so here we are today, right? We are looking at temperament still. We started it earlier in August, and we are going all the way through November to talk about temperament and how it impacts your parenting.
That's just because there's so much good stuff to cover. We had to cover it all.
I'm going to be very sad when we're done.
I'll probably talk about something else.
I'll be slipping it into everything that we do.
Yeah.
All right. But first, we better remind you what temperament is and what temperament isn't. So we look at temperament as this foundation. Temperament has always been there. It's been this foundation that we start life on. And we layer things like child development, growth, personality, who we grow up with, where we grow up. That gets all layered on top of our temperament. But it's always been there at the start. And so as we look at temperament in parenting, that's really the foundation from which our child responds to everything in the world.
Absolutely. Right at the core, right at the foundation from the beginning. And you might remember that we are basing our temperament episodes on the 9 traits that were identified by Thomas and Chess. There's also amazing temperament researchers like Jim Cameron and his colleagues at Kaiser Permanente, where they have been following kids' temperament profiles for over 30 years. And they've studied thousands of kids, watching that profile over time. And basically what that research says is that everybody is getting all 9 of these temperament traits. We've covered quite a few of them so far. Mm-hmm. Getting close to being done.
Getting close.
Yep. And we've covered quite a few, but everybody's getting all of them. It's just a matter of if we got a lot of this trait or a little. And so, again, we're going to be looking at that, diving into one specific trait again today. But we want to remind you that you can find more of our temperament resources on our website, scienceofparenting.org. If you have questions, want to go scope out one of those profiles, find some of the resources we mentioned in previous episodes. But for today's episode, we get to talk about mood.
We do. And this is one of those tricky ones. But at the same time, as we talk about it, I think people are going to realize that, the definition is, it is what it is. It's just the definition. Yeah. And so as we look to define mood in the temperament world, it can be confusing. But again, essentially, it's just either positive or negative. Mm-hmm. And it's just that natural inborn response. Okay. So we sometimes get kind of queasy about, that word negative, but we're going to talk you through that. We're going to not be queasy about it. And so I like to define it with opposites. And that's the easiest way for me to share with parents and childcare providers and teachers as we talk about this trait. Think about it as opposites. So silly versus somber, content versus discontent, easy to soothe versus hard to soothe. So can you see the opposites here? It's just that natural bent that you view the world from. It's not bad or good. It just is. And think back to the nursery at the hospital, okay? So no one taught those babies on day 1 to be easy to soothe or hard to soothe.
Man, my life would be easier if we could, though, right?
Right? No.
Nobody's teaching them, just temperament.
No choosing allowed. They just were based on their temperament that they got genetically, okay? Mm-hmm. So how do you describe this trait in your own words?
So I also like to think of it as opposites. But another thing that I heard you say as we were getting ready for this episode is the word disposition. And I'm like, that it's the natural, it's not right. It's not planned. It's not taught. It's just it's the disposition. It's what that child or adult, where they naturally sit. And so I like to say the words that come to mind for me are For a high mood child might be like cheery or chipper. And for a lower mood child, I actually tend to think of the word critical. But like I said, not in a negative way, more like in the term of like a critical eye, like good, like noticing additional things. And our writer Barb was like, well, in the critical eye, to be able to check all the boxes, right? To see things, the whole picture, versus maybe a high mood child might or adult might just see some of the positive.
Yes. And
cheery versus critical eye.
And when you say that, it makes me think of whimsy versus worrier. Like, oh, yeah. Yeah. All right. So now
child, hold on.
Yeah.
Don't go yet.
Don't go yet.
I want to talk more. But I think of even like we think of kids as being really silly. And yeah, I love that word whimsy of just like, I think of pretend play and all of those things. But that's not every kid. Some kids are the worrier, the sit back and I don't want to climb that tree because I will fall and break my leg. And so I think understanding that there's nothing wrong with kids who have, or adults who have that lower mood. So yeah, that worrier, I love that.
Yes. All right. So now we know what the definition is. Let's look at it on the temperament continuum. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yes. So again, everybody got all 9 traits. And so everybody has mood. Did they get a little or did they get a lot? And we know it is kind of tricky. When we think about this word mood that we use regularly, we think of like, are you in a good mood or a bad mood? And so everybody has their own typical range, but it comes down to that natural state, right? That foundational mood, that disposition. So can you give us an example, let's say, of that lower end of mood?
Yeah. So on the lower end of the continuum, we talk about it being more negative. And so this child, they might be more somber, more serious, more whiny, more worrisome, more analytical. And as they grow, they are going to be more evaluative of their responses. They're going to think about things more deeply, right? And their responses, honestly, are directly related to their brain patterns. And like, how much I like to talk about brains, right? Right. And so I think about that as a way to say it's not bad. It just is part of who we are when we aim down towards that negative mood on the continuum, a little bit more pessimistic, etc. Do you have a story about a negative mood child, individual?
Yeah. So I actually think of kind of on both ends of the continuum. I have a really good friend who her and her significant other tend to fall on opposite ends. She has always tended to be a higher mood. He tends to be a lower mood. And so even just understanding that that's just a part of who he is. It's not, he's not being negative or trying to be critical or those things, but naturally he can maybe see the worst case scenario, which also means that he's good at planning ahead for it. And her significant other, sometimes it's even teasing of the hypochondriac, but like that worrisome, and it's real. It's not a matter of being dramatic as much as their brain can naturally, right, that foundation. And so those words of like worrier, critical, analytical. And so I think when we see this in kids, like I said, sometimes we think like, what's wrong with them? Why can't they be happy-go-lucky? And there's nothing wrong with them. They have a lower mood and there's actually a lot of strengths about it. Just, it might not be what we naturally think of when we think of childhood.
Exactly. And I think it's really important for us at this juncture to remember we can't just tell them to stop worrying. Just stop worrying. As a child, I worried. And I think and I look back and that negative mood part of me was always there. Like, I just worried. That's part of who I am. All right. So on the other side of the spectrum is the more positive mood. This child is more content, maybe silly, smiley, more friendly. They're more pleasant to be around and they just generally seem more positive. Now, here's the deal. All right. That does not mean that they can't be cranky at some points in time, right? But the one thing about this is that our mood can also hide our true feelings. So if you're looking at a positive mood child, as an adult, sometimes we realize that we've just learned how to put on a happy face. Even when we've felt down on the inside. So it's important to be sure to watch for that child who has a positive mood, to make sure they're not masking how they really feel on the inside, and keeping those doors of communication open.
Absolutely. And I think understanding that also can mean we might be a safe place for our high mood child to melt, right? To not put on the happy face. I actually have an example. I tend to be pretty high mood, and I have an example. I used to be a part of this organization when I was in high school, and I had a really stressful day, and all of these things seem like they're going wrong. And I walk in with a smile on my face, and an adult pulled me aside, and they're like, you know, it sounds like you had a really hard day, but man, you'd go through anything with a smile. And I was like, oh yeah. And he's like, and that's a really dangerous game for you to always be playing.
Oof.
And I like fell apart for someone to call me so hard. I'm like, you are right. But I think one of the phrases I kind of heard you talk about was like the difference in mood and emotion. So I have a high mood. Doesn't mean I don't get frustrated. Doesn't mean I don't feel disappointed. You know, any of those big feelings. I still have those big emotions, right? And of course, we know intensity plays into those, how strongly we feel them. But with mood specifically, my disposition is cheery, is positive, you know, is that sunny. And so as a high mood, we have to watch for that in our kids. And that, yeah, sometimes our high mood kid falls apart for us because they've been putting on the smile for everybody else. And that's exhausting.
It is exhausting. It is exhausting. And this is a great way for us to think about our child's mood and our own mood. So we think about, are they the same or are they different? And remember that temperament is genetic. And so it could be different from yours. And I honestly remember some of this first temperament teaching and learning that I did, realizing and recognizing that I actually tend down towards that negative mood side. And if I look back, I can think about different times in my life where, yes, absolutely, I was on that negative mood side. I already said I worried. I remember a relationship quiz we took said I was more pessimistic, and oh man, I was ticked about that. And I just thought I wasn't accepting and honoring that there are times that I'm more thoughtful. I mean, you know me, I'm the person that has plans A through Z already figured out, right? So if A doesn't work, we've got backup plan B. If B doesn't work, we've got backup plan C. And
I think that comes partially from that ability to see those, like your negative mood allows you to see those worst case scenarios. So, you know, like if this doesn't work, here's plan B. If this doesn't work, absolutely.
Yes. And when I look at my children, I think of a story about a Super Bowl commercial, and the four of us as a family at this point in time, we're sitting on a couch, and the two members of my family that have a positive mood, including my 5-year-old at the time, were watching Super Bowl commercials, and they're designed to be funny, right? So we were sitting on the couch watching the Super Bowl commercial. Myself and my middle child were sitting in the middle. The Super Bowl commercial happened. It happened to be where a businessman walked smack dab into a very clean plate glass window. Boom. And he just drops to the floor. The two positive mood people in my family bust out laughing. My 5-year-old falls to the floor in a giggling fit. And myself and my middle daughter, we sit stoically on the couch looking at each other thinking, that wasn't that funny. You know, it's like, I think that's a really good example of different moods in different households.
Yeah, absolutely. And I tend to have a pretty high mood. Another one of those more extreme traits. I tend to have pretty high mood. I've noticed my older child tends to have pretty high mood. I'm still kind of figuring out with my littlest. Right now he's, you know, he's 1. And so I'm not totally sure. I think he's probably a little more of the middle ground, which we know a lot of people are, right? Fall in that middle of the continuum. And my husband tends to be, I think he's kind of moderate, but definitely lower than I am. So
Yes,
that, but how do we create that goodness of fit, even whether it's similar or different? And I think,
exactly.
we're going to get into some of those strategies in the Your Reality section, but we do want to look first at how does this mood play out across these different ages, right? We know that in certain stages, we might consider a certain trait to be an asset, and in other
Mhm.
stages, we might feel like it's kind of a liability and something we need to watch out for. So, can you walk us through a
Yes.
little bit of these kind of different ages and how mood might play out?
Yeah. So I think that especially when we look at infancy and as first time parents or second or third time parents, we think about that infant and we think, oh, content and smiley and the easygoing asset, 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 right? And I think that yes, wouldn't that be great if all infants who are involved in this social emotional response to adults were more content and easy to soothe?
Mhm.
But there's this part of infants that aren't. And I think
Yes.
it's really important to recognize that they are so worth smiling and cuddling and holding and
Yeah.
having that same face that you have, glued on when you're looking at your smiley, content and easy to soothe infant. Think about your
Mhm.
face. And I want you to try to put that same face on, even if your infant is not easy to soothe and not content, and show them that same amount of compassion and acceptance and love.
Absolutely.
It's so hard to have a negative mood infant, and it really hurt, like it literally just hurts my insides sometimes
Mm,
thinking about how hard that is.
mhm.
So
Well,
toddlers,
I'll
go
say,
ahead.
hold on. So as infants, I remember, so one of the profiles I completed for my kids, right, has this trait of soothability. Is
Mhm.
mood a part of that? So like how easy it is to soothe an infant, is that kind of a part of the soothability
Yeah, part of the
in mood?
soothability, also the ability to adapt and help them adapt to types of things.
Okay.
Mhm.
So that's more than one. Movement is a part
Yes,
of it, but not the whole trait. Okay. Sorry, I needed to
exactly.
ask that before we go
No,
to
it's all
go
right. It's all right. So when
on.
we look at toddlers and we think about them moving into that idea of independence and I want to do it my way, and you think about the independent toddler who's enjoying, learning new things, or the independent toddler who like you do it. I'm
Wow.
scared. I'm worried about trying these new independent things. Again, as adults, we see the bigger picture. They don't. And
Mhm.
so when it comes to mood, it's really important for us again to accept whatever it is their mood is at and recognize that it's just their natural bent, their
Yeah.
natural tendency.
And I think that earlier you said the word whiny for negative mood. And I
Mm.
think, a lot of times when we teach parent education or early childhood, child development things, that is a hard behavior for a lot of people. And I think low mood can have a lot to do with that, especially kind of in this toddler age where they're working on so much. And it's hard to learn all these things all the time. I'm learning to walk and I'm learning to talk, and you expect things
Oh,
of me, and there's rules.
yes. Yes, and now
Yeah.
you're asking me to feed myself and put my own shoe on and put my own coat on, and I don't feel like all these things. And
Yes.
all right, so let's look at the preschooler. They're
Mhm.
starting to be in some of their first formal education places, their first
Mhm.
play groups, and as you think about the negative mood versus the positive mood child, we think about the idea that the positive mood child probably fits into more play groups easily. They're easier to get
Mhm.
along with. Where the negative mood child, they might be hesitant to join some of the play groups. And frankly, sometimes because they are checking the boxes, they just might actually be more challenging as a friend because they might be telling you, well, that's not where the blocks go.
Mm.
You didn't make that color the right color. You did. And so that's part of their mood is to be critical and to see things in an evaluative type of way. And so that might be hard sometimes when you're in some of those first
Mhm.
social settings.
Yes, and I think of, like, those 3 and 4-year-olds figuring all those things out in this new
Mm,
environment with new friends and a teacher and all these people, and, like, taking all of that in, and then in their low
mhm.
mood, being able to see I mean, what I would say is the worst case scenario, right? And like, oh, we can't do that this way, and this is not
Mhm.
how this goes. And yeah, I can see that low mood playing out, making it, I almost want to use the word like contemplative, of like they're just
Absolutely. That's a great word.
considering so much of it.
They are. They are. And so then think about the mood when we get to the formal education, the elementary school, middle school, high school. And again, those positive opportunities to be in social groups and to be the friend that just everyone gets along with. But we think about, it's easy to be taken advantage of when you have a
Mhm.
positive mood and people just think you're always going to go along with it. You talked about, masking. Well, I'm just always
Yes.
happy and, not being assertive because you're you're just going to be positive about it
I'm gonna
and
be friendly about it.
I'm going to be friendly about it. Yes. And then
Yes.
the negative mood, again, they might challenge a teacher if the teacher isn't explaining it correctly, or maybe they have an error, or, they
Mhm.
just might be that friend that is honest about, how that shirt does look on you.
Yes,
Right.
that critical eye, they've got
Yes,
it.
they've got it. So again, as we grow and learn about our temperament and our children's temperament, it just becomes that space for us to think about, okay, so as a parent, what tips and tricks and techniques do I need to teach my child because of the mood, their natural mood and how they look at the world?
Yes. And that really does bring us right to that goodness of fit, right? We've talked
Mhm.
about that in basically every episode that, it's about learning to respond to their temperament, to their natural mood, that we can support their natural tendencies and help them build the skills they need to navigate the world successfully. So, as parents, right, we're the adults. So, even though we have our own temperament, maybe it clashes, maybe it fits well. It is our job to help them learn to respond to the world. And that can mean for us that we're accommodating and understanding and anticipating. So it's a
Yeah,
lot to do with goodness of fit. So with that
it is.
mood in particular.
It is. And one of the things I think that we have started to do along the way here in these trait deep dive discussions
Mhm.
is think about, what's wonderful. So what's wonderful about the positive mood? What's wonderful about the negative mood? When you think about what's wonderful about mood and its continuum, what do you think?
So I think of some of my like friends and even like my colleagues who have low mood. And I would see a wonderful thing about having a colleague with a low mood is like I think you're great at anticipating things. Like because you do with that, with that lower mood, that more negative critical eye, you're able to see things that I gloss over as like, "Oh, it's fine." That is a risk of my high mood. But so I appreciate that, maybe that kid that has a low mood is less likely to maybe take those kind of risky things
Mhm.
because they could see the worst case scenario.
Mhm.
What would you say is wonderful about low mood?
So it was a hard one for me to accept for a long time. And I remember when I took a temperament profile and we were scoring it by hand. And this
Mm,
was kind of my first dive into what is this thing called temperament. And
mhm.
my mood didn't, it's not all the way on the end of the continuum, but
Yeah.
it's towards that negative direction. And I thought, well, I must have scored this wrong. I don't math well. I must have scored this wrong. And then I thought about that
Mm,
pessimist test that I took earlier, and I thought about being a worrier as a kid, and I thought, "Wait a second, this can't be true. I don't want this to be true."
yeah.
And then I had to go, "Okay, well, so what's wonderful about it?" I do have backup plans. I do think through things. Yes, I'm highly adaptable and highly active,
Yes.
but at the core of my being, before I've jumped and changed, I've probably figured out already what the worst case scenario is, and I'm okay with that.
Mhm. And I think a difference between you and I am maybe more apt to jump and not have thought through every single worst case. Like we're both pretty highly adaptable, but
Yes.
you're more apt to have thought through that worst case scenario. And I'm like, it's gonna be good. We're gonna do this. So that is again a risk of high mood because I appreciate that trait about you. I do think that's a wonderful thing.
Well,
So
thank you.
yeah.
The one thing I read as we were going through things was that it's really important, and we'll probably get to this in the strategies, but it is important to remind those of us who are negative mood to appreciate and look for gratitude. So thank you. I appreciate that use of that. What's wonderful about the positive mood?
I guess I would say the ability to see the bright side. And that's kind of what I naturally, it's kind of that more optimistic. And like you said, I mean, it feels a little self-serving to say the word likable,
Oh.
but like easy to get along with most people and that kind of thing. So those are positive things. And so as I think about that in my own child, that's something I can appreciate is the chipper, easy to get along with kind of attitude. What would you say is wonderful about a high mood?
I think that what I most wanted and the reason that I felt so unsure of why I wanted to be all the way over in the positive because that's what I saw was, it's wonderful to look at something and not immediately start to think about, well, what's the worst case scenario? Like that's wonderful to just be so able to look at it and go, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And again, like I said, like I can do that, but what you don't know in the background is that I have immediately, very spontaneously and quickly processed through everything else first.
Like, well, and I even think of with my co-parent, when we go to make decisions together, I tend to be the optimist of like, okay, and this and this and these things would be wonderful. And my co-parent tends to be the realist of like, okay, and and I'm like, stop it. But it is a wonderful trait. I would probably get into some trouble if, my partner didn't have more realism than I do.
Yes. Yeah.
So, there are so many wonderful things about both sides of this temperament continuum and, being right along that middle when it comes to this trait of mood. So we think about strategies. We like to share this research and reality with you around these traits and across all of our podcasts, share the research and reality, and we want to bring it back to your reality. So as a parent, as a listener or a viewer, we know that your reality looks different than each of us and what your child's temperament or children's, right? It might vary what your temperament, your co-parent, all those things come together. But we like to bring it back to your reality and the strategies you can use now that you maybe have a little more understanding of mood. So Lori, since you are a little bit more of an expert on a little bit lower mood, do you want to share some strategies we come across for that?
I will. So one of the things that we've been able to do as we've been diving into temperament is talk with different researchers. So these specific tips come from Rona Runner, who wrote a book called Is That Me Yelling? And from Mary Sheedy Krasinka, who wrote Raising Your Spirited Child. And so I'm going to focus on the negative mood tips and tricks that we need to kind of teach our children because of essentially what we gave them, remember? Yeah. So this particular child is going to need help understanding their disposition and how to learn to be positive and tactful. Okay, as we are well aware of different things that happen and the tact of what we're responding to. We need to share with them examples. We need to have conversations and just be real about things that we say and how it sounds. That's something that I definitely do with my middle daughter is when you say it this way, people may hear it this way. And as she's grown, she's needed to learn, I can't be so blunt because I want my message to be this instead of this.
So I think that word tact is a really yes, you can see things with a critical eye. So helping to teach them about being tactful and how they maybe share that information with other people. Great strategy.
And you're still appreciative of what they got. It's not that you're telling them, don't be this way. That's not it, because this is their nature. It's how can we work with what's in your nature. And so the other thing I was mentioning was helping them to learn how to practice gratitude and being grateful, and that their feelings are valid and valued. But how can we practice gratitude and find that grace and enjoyment in the things that we do have?
Yeah.
And a really important part of that piece is helping them use words and sharing words with them to notice what's going well.
Yes.
Sharing and really having conversations and connecting with them
And
about
so I think
that.
if they're seeing worst case scenarios and they're, with the low mood and natural worry, or like, okay, some of the things that are going well, that practice of like, okay, yep, we're worried that this might happen on picture day. These are the things that are already going well. Love
And
that.
you lead right into the fourth strategy, which is to work together to celebrate small successes. You got to celebrate those small successes because they've already thought about the big picture. And they are already 10 steps ahead of you, thinking about now, what does the big picture look like? So you got to back them up and celebrate the small successes.
Yes. I think of, sometimes a common experience for maybe someone with a low mood, gift giving, or gift receiving, I should say. When they receive a gift, one is the natural gratitude, that it may not be as high as it is for other people. Not that they don't appreciate it, but the expression of like, I should tell you. And so I think, it kind of comes back to that word anticipate, right? Temperament shows a pattern, and so you can anticipate. So with low mood, it might be a combination of teaching that child with a low mood, okay, when someone gives you a gift, you open it, you look at them, you smile, and you tell them thank you. And so that's part of teaching that tact, using your words, putting all those pieces together, that it's like, okay, I need to anticipate your natural low mood means that might not come to you easily. So I will teach you the process.
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. What about the other side?
Yes. So as I think about high mood, I would say sometimes being the optimist. As a child, and my high mood child, one of the strategies is to kind of help them heed caution, is kind of how I want to say it. But yeah, the optimist might jump in pretty easily to something because, well, it's going to go well. And so helping, if a low mood child can see that worst case scenario pretty easily, high mood child might not so much. So that is an important strategy for those kids, right? It can seem happy go lucky and we don't need to worry about their mood, but it's like, okay, but so we need to think through potential consequences of things. Might need to help them develop that skill. And then the other thing that I would say for a high mood child, I shared my example with that adult who said, you'd smile through anything. Watching for that in our high mood kids, there's this term masking where, you're putting on that happy face for everybody. And so watching for that in your high mood child who, will put on that happy face, even when they're because their mood is high, but their emotions might not feel good at that time, right? They might be frustrated, disappointed, angry, any of those things. And so that means providing a safe space for them. So when people say, and I have said it myself, like, my child does not act like this for other people. Why are they doing this to me? Okay, doing it to me, I'm a safe space. And so she doesn't need to put on that big happy smile for me. She knows I'll love her either way. And so, yes, for other people, she might put on the big happy smile and she gets in the car and she is exhausted from that masking, right? That being that chipper and that friendly and those things. So that's strategies I would say for high mood is help them, think through scenarios and think about consequences, as well as watching for that masking and giving them a safe space to feel.
Yes.
So,
okay, so let's see how we do today. We're going to bring in our producer, Kenzie, and this is where she gets to pull in a question based on our topic of the day. And, just give us this moment to stop, take a breath, and, think about the topic in a different way, possibly. So come on in, Kenz.
Hello.
hello. You're not a face we usually see.
You are not,
podcast,
Kenzie.
Barb.
Hi, everybody.
I'm so excited.
I want to say hello. I am Barb Dunn Swanson, and I'm part of the Science of Parenting team as well. And I'm a parenting educator. And today we wanted to put you all in the mood. And we thought we would do that by having me come in and just talk a little bit about my question for you.
Okay.
This is
I'm
so
so
good.
excited. I love seeing your face on here so much.
Well, I'm happy to join you. I enjoy listening to you so much. I learn something every time that we get together. And I think about parents who really want their children to be happy and joyful. That's what they want. They want their children to have positive experiences all day long. And then how do we help parents have reasonable expectations when their mood might be on the lower end? How can we talk to parents so that they might celebrate the opposite end, even when it isn't high all the time? Wonder if we could talk about that for a minute.
Yes. Yes.
Yay. Okay, I'll start.
Okay, good.
You weren't jumping on like, okay, I'm gonna start. So having a child that has a more negative mood, I remember thinking, and I still do, sometimes I would try to explain away her actions or her behaviors to others and explain that, well, she really meant to say, because when she was younger, she wasn't as tactful. And I just remember thinking as a parent, I need to protect her from her negative mood. And I didn't always appreciate it. And so there is that risk of explaining it away and then explaining it away in front of the child and having the child take on the idea that whatever I am isn't right. Or whatever I am isn't good enough. And so this idea of expectations, really letting your child know that it is okay for you to feel this way. Now, in this situation, we're going to say things like this. And as they get older, we can explain more and more. But that idea of what can we expect and anticipating, what can we expect in this situation? I can anticipate that in this situation, my daughter, her mood is going to be negative. She did not like to be the center of attention when it came to gift giving. And so if someone gave her this really extravagant, amazing, wonderful gift, I mean, she might tuck her face into my chest and hide. And so there was that part of me that thought, I have to explain away why she looks like she's not grateful for this wonderful, extravagant, magnificent gift. But that negative mood, it's just different. And later on, she might talk about this wonderful, magnificent, extravagant gift, right? So just the expectations has to do with understanding and still appreciating and anticipating.
Yes.
Thank you. That's a good way to look at it. Thank you.
And I would say as a parent with a pretty high mood, I might be disappointed. Like if we're really honest, that I think of the joy and the experiences with my high, I think of myself, if I'm a little selfish there, like, oh, I just want you to have these great, wonderful, extravagant, those feelings. I associate those things with being positive and being, that's a good thing in childhood. And so there might be a reality if you're a high mood parent with a low mood child, there can be that process of a little bit of grief, and it's okay to give yourself space to have those feelings and at the same time find wonderful things about your child. And so that low mood, we want to maximize their potential, even if it's different potential than ours. There's great things about that low mood. And so we can maybe feel a little disappointed and give ourselves personal space for that and honor their mood and help them find the positive in it.
Thank you. As we've talked about these traits, the thing I've been saying is it's all about the gift. We all come into the world with our gifts. and our traits are our gift to the world.
Mm.
So thank you for helping me think through that a little bit, and maybe how I can do some explaining when maybe someone comes across more lower on the spectrum of mood, how I can leave space for them to have those feelings, and yet allow myself to understand that we're all different, and that we're all coming into it with our own gifts. So thank you very much for letting me join your time today. It was great.
This was the best surprise.
I'm thinking, okay, so she just happened to have the navy blue background. So she just happened to, they're so tricky.
I love it. Thanks for hopping on here with us, Barbara. It's so good to see your face here on the podcast. You give us so much good insight to share with people by being our writer. So we love having you on.
Thank you.
Thanks, Barb. So Barb is sharing with us a little stop, breathe, talk question today. That was a surprise for us.
That was great.
It does. It gives us that chance to stop, right? We talk about that technique in parenting. Stopping, recognizing our own feelings and emotions, right? That can be associated with it. Take a breath, get re-regulated, and then to speak with intention. And so we like to take that little pause as we think about this trait, stopping, recognize the feeling. And so Barb brought us a great question today to think about that mood continuum. Love that.
So thanks for joining us today on the Science of Parenting podcast. And remember to subscribe to our weekly audio podcasts on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. And you can watch us on Facebook on our video feed every week. And even every once in a while, we'll let you join us live where we can take your comments and questions.
Absolutely. So please come along with us as we tackle the ups and downs, the ins and outs, and the research and reality all around the science of parenting.
The Science of Parenting is a research-based education program hosted by Lori Haynes and Mackenzie Johnson, produced by Mackenzie DeYoung with research and writing by Barbara Dunn Swanson. Send in questions and comments to parenting@iastate.edu and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. This program is brought to you by Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. This institution is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or accommodation inquiries, go to www.extension.iastate.edu/diversity/ext.